poco ma buono, as they would say in Italy. But I just really admire the stalwarts who are here ready to face down the third nor'easter in 2 weeks. And for all of the people who are watching on Facebook Live or via live stream on YouTube, we hope that you enjoy Florida. We hope that California is beautiful. But in New York, we're ready for the next storm. So hope you're enjoying your warm weather. If it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger, as we know. This evening, we are absolutely thrilled to have Angela Meade here for our conversation. As you know, Angela is one of the most talked about sopranos of her generation, starring in the greatest theaters around the world. She's been doing Semiramide to great success here in New York most recently, but earlier in the season, of course, had great success in Norma, just some of the most difficult roles ever written for a soprano. She is a winner of prizes, as we'll talk some with her about the number of competitions that she won and the important ones that shaped her career. We're going to talk to her, too, about some of the advice that she might give younger singers who are climbing the ladder of operatic success. So with great gratitude, with your applause, let's greet Angela Meade. Thanks so much.
Hi.
Thank you so much. Please, have a seat. It is wonderful to have you here at the Opera Center and to have you in New York for a good bit of the season this season, singing some very demanding roles.
That's what they tell me.
Well, we'll talk about that because I guess we'll get to it in a little while, but what is hard for one singer is not as hard for another, and it just depends on the instrument, but we'll get there. As you know, I love starting out my interviews by asking, who brought you to your first opera?
Myself. I was a student at the Pacific Lutheran University doing my undergrad, and there was a local opera company, Tacoma Opera, in Tacoma, Washington, and they were doing Così fan tutte, and I guess I was an opera student then. I had just transferred to PLU as a music major, and I decided I would go. So I went.
And what was your reaction?
I loved it. Obviously.
Well, not necessarily. We've spoken to some people for whom they're great singers, but it's still an acquired taste over the years.
Yeah, no, I loved it.
And Così, little did you know that you wind up singing the role.
Yeah, a couple of different times.
Yeah.
I actually stumbled upon my recording from AVA earlier today, just haphazardly, and then I saw you were showing video of it.
Absolutely. And the other night I listened to a little bit too. The Per Pietà is just so beautiful. No. So beautiful. So at college, you knew that you were a singer by the time you got to college?
No. Not exactly. Not an opera singer anyway. I grew up singing in church, and I knew that there must be something special about how I sing because when I was young, I was really nervous to get up and sing in front of people. And they would ask me to do like solos at church all the time. And I would sort of be like, I don't know. But then they would like beg me and then I'd be like, okay, fine. So I would get up and sing. My mom played the organ, and so she would accompany me. And then I got involved in grade school. I played in the band. I played flute. And when they had a choir, I was involved in choir and did it all through high school. And then when I went away to, I went to community college first because I didn't know what I wanted to do with myself. And my parents were like, instead of wasting a bunch of money on a four-year university, go to community college. And I thought that I was going to be a doctor because I also excelled in math and sciences and was sort of taking pre-med-ish sort of things. Sort of hated it. Was moonlighting in the college choir and taking some music theory classes just as an elective, and sort of fell in love with it. And I had a choir teacher there, Donna Huffman, who said, I know you love to sing, you have a beautiful voice, I've got a friend who's a voice teacher, would you be interested in taking some lessons? So
the first voice lesson wasn't until college?
Correct.
Not high school?
I mean, in high school I sang in like solo and ensemble contests, and my choir teacher then, Marilyn Turner, gave me some lessons just for that particular event. But other than that, in college.
So there is a lesson, you have a voice. When did it become a decision of yours that it was going to be a career?
Well, so I went to take some lessons with this gentleman, and he gave me a couple of arias in my first lesson, and I went home and I learned them, and I thought, this seems like a really natural way for me to sing. And I went back the next week, and he said, you know, this is great. You sound like an opera singer. I had no idea what that meant. I was like, how? What does that mean? So he sort of explained it to me, and I became very curious, and I started listening to other singers and exploring different operas and stuff. And I mean, in my hometown, without going up to Tacoma or Seattle, there was nowhere to see opera. So, and that time there was no internet and there was no YouTube, and so I couldn't really do that either. So I sort of decided after that I had sort of fallen in love with it, and I told my parents that I wanted to transfer to a four-year university as a music major, and they thought I was crazy.
Is it pre-med, music?
Yeah, right, exactly. Right. They were like, how are you going to support yourself? Are you going to live with us the rest of your life?
Right. Not how are you going to support yourself, how are you going to support us?
Well, yes, that too. So I just went ahead and went. I did the audition at PLU and got in and transferred there. So I was at PLU for 3 years after that. And I excelled while I was there. I ended up winning their top scholarship that they had, called the Mary Baker Russell Music Scholarship. And after I finished there, my parents were still uncertain, right? I didn't know exactly how it was going to pan out. I moved actually to New York and went to the Manhattan School of Music for a very brief amount of time, and 9/11 happened right after I moved here.
Oh my word, I didn't
So
realize
I was
that.
terrified, and I moved back home for a year and worked.
Sure.
And then I went to USC because I'd gone to the Bayview Music Festival in Michigan, and Gary Glaze, who was the head of it then, said, if you ever want to come to USC, just let me know. So after all this had happened moving here, I called him and I said, this is what happened in New York. I really would like to do my master's. You know, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, sure. So I went down there and auditioned, and they took me, and I went and did my master's there and excelled there too. I was in the opera in a leading role every semester.
So was USC the first time you did staged opera?
No, I did some staged opera at PLU.
Really, they did staged opera?
Yeah, I sang
there?
Rosalinda and Fledermaus. We did half of Figaro, so I sang Countess in half of Figaro.
It is so interesting to me when small liberal arts colleges are putting on staged opera.
Yep.
That's really remarkable.
Yeah, we did a lot of scenes programs and things like that too.
Phenomenal.
But, yeah.
So then you were a bit of a veteran by the time you got to USC.
Yeah, and then so when I was also at Bayview, I did First Lady in flute. So I went to USC, and I guess that's sort of where if we want to put myself in a box, the dramatic coloratura thing happened. My very first semester, they also cast me as First Lady, and I said, you know, I've already sung this. I'd be really interested to sing Queen of the Night. And they were like, sure you would. And you probably don't have those notes, nor do you have coloratura, because we think you're just a lyric / spinto soprano.
Right.
And I was like, well, actually I do. So they did a little audition for me, and they said, by God, you can. So I sang Queen of the Night the first semester. Yes, painted blue and with a white spiky Tina Turner wig. Yes.
Wow. Is that the last time you sung Queen of the Night?
Yes, it was. It was. So I did that, and then I know you're going to ask me later about young artist programs, but I'm going to have to insert this now. So I auditioned for a bunch of young artist programs and didn't get into anything. And so I stayed at USC and started my doctorate. I had a full-ride teaching assistantship, and stayed there for a year. And so I'd already completed my master's, started my doctorate. I came to New York to do the Met semifinals, which I had made it to, and didn't get any further and was feeling really bad about myself. But I'd already set up an audition for AVA, and I thought, well, heck, I'm just going to go do it anyway. And if they don't take me, whatever, who cares? And they took me on the spot. So then dilemma. So then I moved to to Philadelphia and did my 4 years at AVA. And while I was there, I made my Met debut.
Wow, so you made your Met debut while you were still at AVA.
Yeah.
I hadn't realized that there was that overlap.
Yeah, I had another year left afterwards.
You know, I still have a letter. Back in the very, very early 1980s, I applied for a professional development program that was run by an Opera America sister organization, and I was turned down for it. And I still have that letter, and I think it's really important, you know, that you persevered. You didn't get into the young artist programs, but here you got into AVA. immediately on auditioning. So it all comes out okay.
It does. I wish I'd have kept all those rejection letters from all the young artist programs.
Or just one, or just one, or just one. But you were getting your stage experience by doing stage opera at USC and doing then stage opera, of course, at AVA. So what a young artist program might have given you in stage experience, you were gaining elsewhere.
Right. True. And I was also getting to sing like all lead roles.
Right. And of course, with a voice like yours, some of the ensemble work that is part of a young artist training program may not have been very helpful for you.
Which is probably why a big reason why I didn't get in. I don't think they knew what to do with me, and I didn't sort of fit the mold of, whatever. So
Right. And that is one of the challenges of the young artist programs, I think, in our industry, is that they don't necessarily accommodate the unusual voice, the large voice,
True.
the voice that shall not blend.
True.
And that it is that kind of very special sound that we like to hear on the opera stage may not be appropriate for a young artist program.
True.
Well, true in your case.
I guess, yeah. I mean, it worked out for me, but
And AVA is such a fascinating institution. And it's for years. I mean, I knew it from the years that I worked at Opera Philadelphia back in the 1970s. A really quirky, wonderful place. And you studied with good teachers and got to do staged opera.
absolutely.
And then competed, well, you auditioned at the Met. Because you won the Met when?
So I auditioned twice.
Okay.
I auditioned the first year and got to the semifinals and then didn't make it any further.
Right.
And that's when I auditioned for AVA.
Right.
And then while I was at AVA, I did the auditions again and made it all the way to the finals and won.
How fantastic. That's just a wonderful trajectory. Now, do your parents believe in it today?
Yes. I think it was actually that magical day after I won the Met competition and they offered me the cover contract at the Met that they were sort of like, oh, maybe you can live doing this. You don't have to live in our basement. So.
How wonderful. Now, you talked about being nervous in singing in front of
When
people.
I was young, I mean, I was,
When did the nerves disappear?
I mean, I think I still get a little bit of anxiety about it because I'm such a perfectionist that I don't want anything to go wrong on
Right.
stage. But I've just sort of made peace with it. I mean, I made a comment in an interview down at WQXR a few weeks ago, and I saw somebody who commented had issue with what I said. But what we do is not brain surgery, right? So no one's going to die if somebody messes up. And I just had to come to peace with that. Mistakes happen. I've seen things happen on stage. Things have happened to me. So, and I'm still alive. So, I just had to sort of let it go.
You bring up a point that I sometimes discuss with people. I hadn't put it on this list here. But it used to be in the old days where the people who heard the performance were the 3,000 people in the theater. And they went home and they wrote in their diary, heard Angela, what a wonderful evening. Or heard Angela, it wasn't her best night, but can't wait to see her
And then
again.
it disappeared.
Exactly.
And now it lives forever,
Exactly.
as we saw in the video.
Right, so that here you are, and the live performance is transmitted on radio, it's transmitted from the stage via HD camera. There are people who at intermission are texting about it.
Tweeting.
Do you feel just somehow imprisoned by that?
I mean, I guess maybe a little bit. I mean, I'm excited that it gets out there in so many different venues and hopefully can get to many more people. But at the same time, I was watching some actors, like the Actors Studio, discussing the other day that when they're in movies, that's ends up being their finite performance, even though they think it evolves over time. And I feel like that with our performance, like the night that you saw it, it might evolve past that. And I think that's imprisoning about it.
And in another conversation with a different singer, he remembered on the stage here not feeling well and trying to decide to go on or not to go on.
Oh, that's a hard call.
And it was going to be, I think it was an HD transmission, or it may have been just a radio broadcast. But he said, if I go on and don't sing well, people will comment about that and about how I shouldn't be singing this role.
Right.
And if I don't go on, I don't get paid. I've been a canceller, and there'll be people who comment about that.
Right.
So it's very hard. I guess that's just part of the thick skin of being a performer these days, is that you deal with that.
And there's also a lot of pressure a lot of times from the house because they want you to sing,
Sure.
right? So it sort of can end up sort of a no-win situation to sing when you don't feel well and to sort of power through it and maybe not be at your best, or to cancel and then everybody be disappointed. And then maybe you disappoint the house and you know, maybe they get mad at you and then they don't hire you back or whatever, and then it can snowball into a whole lot of things.
That's really difficult. You know, if you wake up in the morning and just aren't feeling
Well, I
up
had
to
a
yourself.
situation in Los Angeles. I was doing Norma, and I didn't have a cover, and I got terrible, 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 terrible stomach flu. And there was no one to sing for me. I mean, I didn't have a choice. So what do you do in those situations? I mean, a lot of times when you sing in Europe and stuff, you don't have covers.
Right.
So,
And of course, in Europe, perhaps there is someone to train right away in another city who can sing the role.
and a lot of times, specifically with rep that I sing, or you know, held in tenor rep or stuff like that, it's so specialized that I mean, who are you going to call? If it's Bohème, I mean, there might be a Mimi walking down the sidewalk.
I was just gonna, that's what you get. That's what you get for not singing Musetta.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, you know, it is difficult to think about that exposure in this media world to opinion, frequently uninformed opinion, and to media that transmits your performance all over the place.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Now, you are famous for the number of competitions that you won.
I guess, yeah.
And of course, those competitions help pay the bills.
Indeed.
And yet they have to do more for your career. Of course, you're being heard by people, but they also have to tell you you're good, you're onto something. What do those competitions mean for you?
I mean, I sort of started doing them. I just started doing them actually while I was at PLU, and there were hardly any to have at that time in Washington State. But I went around and did the ones that there were. The very first one I did actually was connected to this voice teacher that I started studying with there. He was part of the Olympia Washington Opera Guild, and he said, "We have a competition, you should come and do it." So I did. And it worked out well. And then I thought, this is a really cool way to like fund stuff. I should do more of them.
Right.
And this is all pre-internet, right? So you had to figure out where they were and how. You know,
Yes.
When I finally went to USC, they had in the music office, they had a file cabinet where they would put postings in it, and I would go in there every couple of days, every week. It got to be a joke at USC amongst my friends because they would all go out and do other things on the weekends, and I would go and do competitions and win. And they were like, "What did you do this weekend? What did you win this weekend?"
I'm sure they loved it.
I'm sure, yes. And I just sort of, I guess, caught the bug for doing it. I found that I was good at it. I mean, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And then I started, when I moved to Philadelphia, I started doing sort of the bigger ones, the ones that were in New York, and the ones that were internationally and stuff like that. So
It's kind of like Roger Federer. Does he really need another, you know, trophy? But yeah, sure.
Right.
Sure. Is there a competition winning it that meant the most to you?
Well, definitely, I think the Met. I mean, that changed my whole life. It changed my whole career. Because if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have had the offer the next day to cover Elvira and Ernani. I wouldn't have been there covering when Sandra got sick. They wouldn't have put me on. It wouldn't have happened, blah, blah, blah.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
And of course, the Beverly Sills Award at the Met, the Richard
It's
Tucker.
not really a competition, though.
But
I mean, I didn't go sing for it.
Which is, in a way, even more special, that it's, it's a bestowal.
They're right, they are. Those are
Yeah, the
definitely...
Tucker as well. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The Tucker Award, the big prize, and the Beverly Sills, they're decided upon by a committee. You don't actually go and sing for them. So to have them pick me was
pretty
a great
special.
honor, yeah.
So many of the competitions were, including whatever other repertoire you sang, Casta Diva.
That's true.
And
about 50 of them, of the 57, yes.
there aren't many young sopranos who have as a calling card Casta Diva.
It's true.
How did that come to speak to you and you to it?
I love beautiful music, and beautiful melodies speak to me. And when I was at USC, this was shortly after the Queen of the Night thing, I was talking to my voice teacher, Gary Glaze, about what repertoire I should sing. And I've always been the curious type, so I was listening and learning and looking at other things. And I stumbled across the aria, not realizing any sort of implications of it at all. I just was like, this is really beautiful. And it didn't seem difficult to me because of where it lied. Like, it didn't lie super high. And so I wasn't like, oh, this is going to be super hard because it's so high and like I have to like have so much control over it in order to sing it up there.
Right.
So I thought, well, I'll just play around with this. And I took it to him and he's like, okay, we can work on this, but you're not allowed to take it anywhere. And I did not listen. I took it to a competition like 2 weeks later. And I sang it for the competition, and I won the competition. But I remember in the notes, they were like, you should put this away. And being the defiant sort, I didn't. And then I took it to some more other competitions, and I kept winning with it. And I was like, there must be something to this, so I will just keep taking it. And I ended up, I guess looking back now, it was a really ballsy thing to do, especially to go in and start with it. I did find that if I didn't start with it, nobody asked for it.
Really?
Yes.
No, because that's a surprise. I would imagine that if you didn't start with it, everyone would ask for it.
I think they all thought I was nuts, the people I didn't start with it, so they didn't ask for it.
Isn't that something? Is in part of a competition is usually it is the singer who sings the first aria of her choice, and then the rest of the the panelists, the judges put their heads together. What should we ask her to do? And I would have thought they would have asked for it. That's so funny.
Every single time I didn't start with it, never got asked for it.
But the aria isn't the whole role, and
correct.
Sometimes Norma is a role that people come to later in life. We were talking in the green room about you pay attention to when in someone's career they sing a role. But you've had Norma in your hand for a number of years now. So it's a tough role. How did it come to be something you feel comfortable with from beginning to end?
Well, I started experimenting with stamina roles when I was at AVA. Subsequently, after I had done my Met debut, the Met had asked me to sing a couple of performances of the Anna Bolena. And so AVA, knowing that I was going to do that, planned Anna Bolena for me.
Got it.
So we started doing things like that. And then I sang Lucia as well that season. So I was starting to get these sort of stamina roles under my belt. And then I sang Semiramide at Caramore in 2009.
Right.
And after I finished that, Will Crutchfield said to me, what would you like to do next summer? And I said, I think I'd like to try my hand at Norma. And he immediately jumped on it. It's probably not a smart thing, but it ended up going well. And I survived and came out alive. So I don't know. I think it was really, sort of putting those steps in order just, I wouldn't have started with it for sure.
Yeah, such a notorious role. And you mentioned Will and Caramore, and that was such an important testing ground for you in repertoire.
It was.
In thinking about repertoire, just looking over the past couple of seasons, Handel, Mozart, the bel canto, Verdi, coming up Cilea. Is there a through line for you that unites all of this very varied repertoire?
I mean, I sort of think of all of them except the Cilea in like the bel canto arc. The Cilea sort of sticks out in my mind as sort of bridging into verismo sort of stuff, which I'm just going to play with it and see if I like it. And if I don't like it, I'm just going to take it right back off the table. So, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I want to stick with the early Verdi, bel canto. I'd like to do more Mozart, but people don't give it to me. I don't know why, but they don't. I'd like to stick with those as much as possible and as long as possible.
What makes you decide that you actually want to take on a role? Or what makes you say no?
Well, I definitely have some ideas about, I've been offered a lot of Wagner and have just unequivocally said no across the board. I definitely don't want to do it until I'm, at least 4 or 5, 6 years from now. So those were just no question. I sang one Puccini role. I sang Fidelia in Edgar.
Oh my.
in Frankfurt in concert. But that is unlike a lot of the other Puccini stuff.
Right.
People ask me all the time, why don't you sing Puccini? I'm like, because it's a thick orchestration to push through in the middle of your voice. So that's why I stay away from that.
Yep.
I don't really do verismo at the moment. I mean, I just think that's a later down the road thing.
And so much of the
if you have the facility in the top, I mean, why do that?
Right, right. And so much of that verismo does ask you to just keep pushing in the
Correct.
middle over the orchestration. Some people so struggle with moving the voice with coloratura, and yet in the Semiramide we just hear you, over 2 octaves doing it. What is it about either your training or your voice that makes the coloratura manageable?
I mean, I think I've always had a naturally flexible-ish voice. When Will first asked me to do Semiramide, I thought he was insane. I thought, I can't sing that, even though I'd sung so many Mozart roles with coloratura in it.
But it's a different coloratura.
It is, but I said to myself, Rossini is a different kind of coloratura. I mean, it seems as though there's more notes shoved in a measure, and so therefore the voice has to go faster.
Yep.
I just had to learn to sort of let it go and not be afraid of it, which I think a lot of people struggle with. It takes a lot of work to build the patterns into your brain, and then to just let it go and sort of free fall, if you will.
Yeah. How do you begin to prepare a role? Are you a pianist? Do you sit there alone? Do you start with text? How do you start?
Well, I'm certainly not a pianist that would go and play out in public, but I can play well enough to sort of accompany myself when I'm learning something. I usually sit down and listen to it beginning to end first, see what sticks out to me as difficult.
A recording?
Yeah, a recording of it. And then I'll read through the story, and if there's any sort of source material, I'll go to the source material, and if that'll usually trigger me looking up the history of other things.
Right.
So I
That's
end up in
what's
this
so
whole
great
like
about
black
opera.
hole.
It's so great about opera.
Yeah.
You could just go so far to learn
Exactly.
about the world.
Exactly.
So you do listen to a recording.
I do.
Just to see where it sits. Are there particular singers you think of as, let me hear how she sings it or she sings it, depending on the role?
I mean, almost always I go to Sutherland or Caballé, or both, first. And then out of curiosity, I'll listen to other people who have done it.
Sure.
Yeah.
When do you start singing, or when do you start thinking about text? How does that work?
Almost immediately. I find that I can't color the how I sing it, or if it doesn't inform how I sing it, if I don't know what I'm saying. So it's almost an immediate thing. I mean, after I look at the source material and stuff, I'll sit down and I'll translate it, usually with our old friends, the Nico Castells.
Sure.
And then if there are things in it that stick out to me as being unusual to me, or words I haven't heard or don't understand why the phrase is that way, then I'll actually go to a dictionary and figure that out. And then I'll just re-listen through it. I'll take it to the piano and sort of try to break it apart.
Where does a coach come into the process if you're learning a role?
After all that. I'm not one of those singers that goes to a coach and says, can you teach this to me? I just can't work that way. It doesn't ingrain super fast for me that way. I actually need to like sit down and take it apart and internalize what I'm saying in order to learn it and to then simultaneously memorize it.
Right. Right. And then the coach does what in the process?
Well, they'll help me with different sorts of phrasing ideas or ideas that I hadn't thought about for the character and why the music is the way it is. It helps with memorization.
Do you still study? Do you go to a voice teacher?
I still see my teacher, Bill Schumann. Albeit not very often because I'm never home.
Right.
I see him when I'm in New York because he lives here. I see him sometimes in Philadelphia because he teaches down there. It's usually twice a year.
Yeah. But what does a voice teacher do at this point in your celebrated career? Why do you make time for it?
Well, I went to see him during Semiramide, and we were talking about the aria and crazy stratospheric high note. And just how to approach it, and he kind of helps me work through my nerves if I have it for certain things, and like the really fast coloratura, and sort of helping me just sort of digest it and stuff, yeah. He'll help me with like mouth positions if I'm doing something funny all of a sudden.
Now, you're still such a young singer, but do you find that as you clock on a year or two that your voice changes?
Oh, funny, I was listening to this Così that I did at AVA, which was now 13 years ago.
Our memory lane
yes,
montage.
Yes, memory lane. And I didn't realize until I was listening to that how much my voice has changed, how much it's sort of deepened and broadened and developed warmth, more visceralitude. So.
You can't sing Queen of the Night anymore, or could you?
I probably could.
Oh, okay. So you haven't lost those very top notes?
No, I still warm up to a G.
Do you really? My word. Okay, great. You know, as long as you can, as long as you can do it, sure. Artistic partnerships. You've talked about Bill Schumann. We've talked a little bit about Will Crutchfield. It is kind of wonderful when you and Jamie Barton are singing together because you are close to contemporaries and both have such wonderful voices. How much do those partnerships mean to you?
Oh, I definitely think it helps and informs the production and the opera and the music. To be able to work with somebody that you feel kinesthetic with, somebody that you really enjoy working with, that's a great colleague and a great musician, and to be able to sort of work in harmony with that person is really a joy and a privilege, and I wish it happened more. Liz DeShong, who I'm working with in Semiramide, this is now our second collaboration this year, and we'd never worked together before, and she was also in the Alcina, and we really enjoy working together, so hopefully we'll be able to do some other things.
That's great. So there's a comfort on stage, both musically and physically.
Yep.
When I interviewed Susie Graham here, she said that there were some years where the only person she kissed was Renee when they were doing Der Rosenkavalier together.
Exactly. Yes.
She said we'd be laying in bed before the curtain went up, catching up, how are the kids, what's going on. She's the only person I kissed for several years.
Yes.
Because when we think about it, Renee and Susie and Sutherland and Horn, and just the great pairs that we remember. And certainly you and Jamie in Norma, it's just the great American pair.
I guess we are,
yeah,
yes. That's fantastic to say that and think of it that way.
Where does new opera fall in your spectrum of ambition?
Oh, you're not going to like my answer on this. I mean, I'm not a great lover. I mean, I said earlier, I'm a great lover of melody.
Melody, absolutely.
And there is a lack of that in a lot of the new opera. My husband, John Myers, actually sings a lot of contemporary opera. And so I'll hear him at home sort of plinking out random notes that are sort of strung together sometimes that don't make a lot of sense. And that just doesn't speak to me. I mean, I apologize for all of the people that it does. It's just, it doesn't get me anywhere inside.
How about recital repertoire? Do you enjoy recitals?
I do.
What sort of repertoire do you explore there?
So I've done some Strauss. That's opera. Some opera I'd love to do. I never get cast in Strauss, but I'd love to do some. Strauss, I like to sort of try to stay in the same vein that I sing opera in. So I found a Meyerbeer set that I love. I did some obscure Verdi songs. Those sort of things. I'm trying to think what else I've done. I did like Beethoven's Aperfido, so I'll do like Mozart concert arias.
Oh, fabulous. I'd love to hear you do Aperfido. It's such a great piece.
Yeah.
So you have a career that spans the Atlantic. You sing in Europe, you sing in North America. Are there differences singing opera in the opera houses where it is the cultural heritage in Italy or in France?
Not really.
Any difference in their approach to producing opera that catches your attention?
I mean, it's basically, I would say it's the same, minus the productions that end up out there. They are much more, shall we say, adventurous in what they do in terms of staging types. But I mean, the cast and the conductors and the music staff, I mean, is a lot of the same people that we travel around the world with. So it's just we transport ourselves to a different city and we're all there together. So it's not so different on that end.
You talk about going from city to city, and we chatted a little bit about it in the green room. It is very challenging to be a singer who is as successful as you are, and you probably spend a lot more time in hotels or rented apartments than you do in your own home.
100%
so,
true.
And I'm saying something about myself, that the sense of home matters to me. How do you create a sense of home for yourself as you travel all over the world?
I didn't start doing this until just a few years ago when I think couldn't take it anymore. But I started bringing more. I always tried to pack as light as I could because I was like, God, I have to take all this stuff with me. But I just started bringing things that I wanted there. I bring some kitchen stuff so that I can bake or cook. And a lot of times these apartments that we stay in, they're not well equipped. I bring my own pillow. A lot of times I'll bring my own bedding. I'll bring my yoga mat. I got a dog. I'll bring my dog with me now.
So to bring some of the things that just make you comfortable.
Yes.
Because your husband has a career of his own, so he can't just be with you wherever you happen to be. Is there, in all of that, is there a way that you catch your breath where you just recenter and reground yourself? Is there a hobby that you like to do? Is there something you like to read that just keeps you centered?
Well, I do like to bake. And I will bake and bring stuff for shows and whatever. Actually, on days of shows, I like to bake. I feel like it sort of relaxes me.
Calms you down.
Yeah. And I love to go to the spa when I have some time off.
And home, if you were Dorothy at the end of Wizard of Oz and clicked your heels 3 times, said there's no place like home, where would you wind up?
Probably back where I grew up, Washington State.
Do you get there often?
Usually twice a year. Christmas, although not always at Christmas, and sometime during the summer usually.
Do your parents come to see you from time to time?
My dad he came in New York to see Don Giovanni at the Met last spring. But I've seen him since then. We went actually to his house for part of Christmas.
Yeah. So, again, you're still such a young singer, but people must come to you for advice. You go back to AVA, perhaps to see, Bill Schumann, and the singers must line up. What advice do you have for the rising singer today?
I mean, I think the landscape is different now even than it was 10 years ago when I started my career. Can't believe it's been 10 years. Where did the time go?
When you began your career at the Metropolitan Opera.
Correct, that part, yes. Geez, I don't know. There's so many moving parts to what we do. I don't know that one single piece of advice would be the thing that would help progress them. And there's so many different things. Be a nice colleague, be prepared, be overly prepared. Work really hard, learn your languages, find a teacher that suits you and works for you and speaks your language and can really help you. Get out there and be heard, but before you get out there and be heard, make sure that you've got your ducks in a row. Realize that this is not a glamorous career, even though people think that it is. It's a lot of travel. If you don't like airplanes, you should find something else to do. If you can't be by yourself for very long, you should find something else to do. But, I do love what I do. I mean, sometimes I say to my husband before a show, I'm just going to quit. I can't do this anymore. And then I go out and do it, and I'm like, I love what I do. It's a terrible dichotomy.
Yep.
So.
No, those are great words of advice, and you touched so many of the points. Is there advice you wish you had had?
All of those things.
If someone had said to you, unless you really, really, really want to do this, don't do it, would you have still done it?
Somebody did actually say that to me. In fact, a couple of different people did. And I wavered a lot while I was at AVA in my first couple of years because I wasn't getting into young artist programs and all of these things. And I was frustrated because it was such an incredible workload when I was there, and we had to be on all the time, and we were constantly learning stuff and doing stuff, and we were in shows, and we were doing other recitals, and we had to do these after parties for things, and it was so much. And I thought to myself, my God, if my whole life is going to be like this, I'm going to have a meltdown. And somebody said to me, if you can't imagine yourself doing this, then you shouldn't. But it's the same thing I was just saying. I have these moments before I go out on stage, but then I do it and I'm like, but I love it so much. So I guess I can't live without it.
Is it really that moment just before going out on stage and you think, I can't do this anymore, this is just crazy?
It's usually fine once I get in makeup and hair and costume and everything. It's like the period just before that, the silent sort of period before all of the hubbub starts. When I sort of start to doubt myself. Do I really want to do this? Would I just rather have a life at home where I have babies and a family and a normal job? And you miss a lot of things when you're in this. You miss birthdays and weddings and funerals and holidays and everything. And it can be really, really hard, but really, really rewarding.
Yeah. It's so funny because in all of my speechifying around the country at conferences, it's always in that quiet before the hubbub begins where I go through that, why am I here? Why am I doing this? And I've learned that that's just part of that's the adrenaline. That's the adrenaline coming into my system, and it starts out with 5 minutes of despair. But then that it takes over and off we go.
Yes.
It's very funny that you have those moments, that same reaction.
That's going to be my book, 5 Minutes of Despair. That's what it's going to be called.
but then it's applause and standing ovations. We still have a little bit of time, so I wanted to turn to the audience here, and I can see all of you here. If there are any questions that you have for Angela. Any questions? Barbara.
You said no to Wagner, and I'm sure there are a number of reasons why now, if not eventually. Are there other things you've said no to?
And I'm just going to repeat that because for the live feed, I just want to make sure that they hear it. So are there other things? You've said no to Wagner. Are there other things you've said no to?
There was a lot of Wagner, a lot of the heavier stuff. I was offered heavy Verdi right off the beginning, and I sort of said no to that. And of course the Puccini stuff, and that's about it. Yeah.
And if someone sends you a score, you're happy to take a look at it and see if it fits, or do you rely on friends and colleagues? Do you have a little personal board of directors where if they suggest it, you'll take a look at it?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I'm a pretty good judge of what I think I could do well at. I mean, my manager and my voice teacher and my husband. He likes to
I was hoping
in.
you'd say that.
He
Yeah.
likes to chime in. Give me their feedback and their advice, and most of the time I have a pretty good internal clock about whether or not I should do it, though.
Yeah, Henry.
I know you're married, and he's a tenor. Do you sing with him, and then how did you meet?
Okay.
So again, just repeating it for the live stream, Angela's husband is a tenor, and Henry Cox asked, how did you meet, and do you ever sing together? And how does that go if you do?
We actually met singing together.
Really? Where was that?
In 2010, we were at the Wexford Festival doing Mercadante's fabulous hit, Virginia. And I was Virginia, and he was my cousin, Valerio. And I actually died in his arms at the end of the opera. And that was sort of by design. I sort of knew what I was doing.
So
Kevin, can I? Yeah, okay.
So was the first date in Wexford?
It was. It took forever for him to make a move, though. He would not like that I'm telling that.
That's very
I kept being like, are we going to kiss sometime? 6 weeks later.
Do we have to wait for the stage director to make it happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you sung together since?
We have. We did a Traviata together out in Oregon, and we sang a little concert here together with Lauren Flanagan's thing she does for Christmas.
Sure, absolutely.
One year. We did an Otello where he sang Cassio out in Oregon as well. So a couple times.
How wonderful.
Yeah.
It must be a treat when you get
It
to
is.
sing with your husband.
It is.
Any other questions for Angela?
No one.
Well, yeah, please.
Maybe a little off topic, but I'm curious what you like to bake.
Oh. You want
Please, what do you like? What do you
What
like?
do I like to bake?
You can find the recipe, operamerica.org/recipes.
We have this family recipe that my grandma and my mom always made. They're called mystery bars, and they're kind of like a magic cookie bar, but not. It's like a kind of a blondie on the bottom, but there's no chocolate in it, so it's like a blondie shortbread cookie on the bottom. And then it's got coconut and pecans and raisins on the top, mixed with like sugar and goodness.
That sounds making us hungry.
Yeah, but I like to make like pies, and I tried my hand at a wedding cake decorating class last summer, and I loved it. I've always liked to do like artsy sort of stuff like that with my hands.
Oh, that is so funny.
Yeah.
Well, we have gone from the sublime realm of Norma into first dates and recipes. So it is just so wonderful to just feel your calm insight into your own artistry, into the complex world of opera. It's a privilege to have you here at the Opera Center.
Oh, it's my
Thank you
delight.
so much for taking the time to be with us.
Of course.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Angela Meade. Thank you so much.